Today, we're going to be reading the story Molly by Golly, The Legend of Molly Williams, America's First Female Firefighter. It is written by Diane Ochiltree and illustrated by Kathleen Kemley. This is a really great story because it's the true story of a woman who had to be incredibly brave and strong to do something that was scary and uncomfortable for her. It's a really beautiful narrative that I want you to be looking for story structure in, so the beginning, middle, and end of the story, which means we also need to be looking for what is the problem or the conflict, and then the resolution at the end. I'm sure just by the cover you could probably make a prediction on what you think the conflict in the story is going to be. At the end of the story, I want you to let me know, was your prediction correct or no? So let's dive on in. Make sure we can see these beautiful illustrations. Our Molly is as fine a cook as any in New York City, the lads of the fire company number 11 like to boast. In fact, she's wondrous fine. Molly's hasty pudding is the tastiest, the captain always said. Oh, no sir, Isaac would declare. It's her chicken roly-poly makes a man's mouth water. Hot apple tansy is Molly's most delicious dish, Jonas was sure to insist. The argument would go around the fire company's table until the very last bite of venison stew or codfish muddle had disappeared. But on one thing the men agreed. Molly, by golly, put her hands and heart to every task in or out of the kitchen. Ooh, I like that expression. She put her hands and her heart into everything she did. So she was a very caring and intentional person. She really thought about everything she did. One wintry day, she proved just how wondrous fine she could be. And I bet you it's more than just the cooking. Big storm. Inside the cozy kitchen of Mr. Amar's house, Molly Williams briskly whisked cornmeal, eggs, and buttermilk in an earthenware bowl. Outside, snowflakes swirled thick as cream. Snowdrifts stood tall as haystacks. Molly stirred glowing embers in the hearth oven and worried. Oh, she's probably worried about this storm. As the Johnny cakes baked, a fierce wind knocked at the door and whistled through the chinks in the red-bricked walls. Molly worried more. Snow covered the neighborhood that morning, and a terrible sickness had spread like a thick blanket over scores of households. Influenza. Many of the volunteer firefighters were already sick, and even Mr. Amar lay abed with it. So this is a time when, kind of like what's happening now, a lot of people all at once got really sick. This was before we had medicine and vaccines for the flu, so influenza is the flu, and it affected people pretty badly back then. So, let's see. Oh, Molly has her sweet kitty. Molly scratched the upturned chin of Eliza, one of her many household cats, and wondered aloud, if a blaze sparks in a blizzard, such a thing as this, what will our poor fire lads do? Molly recognized a sound growing louder above the whine of a snowstorm. Had her worry about fire come true? Church bells clang, clang, clanged. They sang out a fire alarm. The number of times they chimed told Molly just where the trouble was. Something's afire, Eliza, and it's nearby, she exclaimed. Molly wrapped a heavy woolen shawl around her shoulders and dashed out to spread the news. So she heard the alarms, and it's kind of cool that depending on how many bells, she knew exactly where to go. So instead of staying home, she went to warn people. Molly spied a small knot of neighborhood boys speeding toward her with lanterns held high. Runners! Molly, by golly, led them through the snow-filled alleyways and icy cobblestone streets. The runners rattled clankers and rang muffin bells. "Fire!" they all cried. "Come out! Come out!" That's why it's so serious when you yell fire, because everyone knows there's an emergency. And people usually respond to that action. Men burst from their homes with bootstraps flapping and coat-tails flying. Women and children tossed out leather water buckets. Molly and the runners scooped them up as they raced to the fire company's equipment shed. So the whole town's coming together to help. Maybe think, have we seen something like this before? Do we have a text to self, a text to book, or a text to world connection? Volunteers busily loaded axes, pulling down hooks and coils of rope into the fire wagon. Molly took a quick count. She'd never seen so few men answer a call. The captain lifted the buckets from her aching arms. "Molly, by golly," he said, "you're always ready to lend a hand." These hands can do much more than bake Johnny cakes, she thought. She clapped a weathered leather helmet on her head and strapped spattered dashes over her woolen leggings and pulled on heavy work gloves. "Wait for me," she cried. I like this author's use of words. It has a fun rhythm to it. Sometimes I might get tongue-tied. They use a lot of rhyme and alliteration. "Molly, by golly," exclaimed the surprised captain. He waved her over to the line of men struggling to drag the heavy pumper engine into the snowy street. Molly took her place on the rope and gripped it hard. "All heave-ho, lads! And, lady," the captain ordered, "get this pumper on its way. 1, 2, 3, pull!" they all chanted. Molly and the men rolled the pumper engine straight away into the street. They dragged it through swiftly drifting snow. Wintry wind whipped at Molly's face and hands, and she never lost her grip. Soon, Molly saw ribbons of soot, so soot like the ash from the fire, twirling between snowflakes, and she heard frightened voices floating through the frozen air. Then, there it was, a small wooden house, ablaze. Uh-oh. I think this might be a major problem in the story. "Step lively now," cried the captain through the speaker's trumpet. "Fire wagon and pumper to the side yard, volunteers and buckets to the river." Step lively kind of means hurry, go quick. Coming close to the snowy bank, the captain chopped holes in the thick ice. Jonas and Isaac dropped buckets into the frigid water. The frigid water flowing below. Molly and the others formed a bucket brigade, passing water hand to hand, filling the tank fast. So they didn't have a hose like they do now, so they had to make a big line and pass the buckets of water all the way to the fire. Think about how much work that would have been and how much of an emergency a fire really was during that time. It's always an emergency, but even more so back then. "Start pumping and be quick about it," the captain shouted. Molly jumped to join the men at the pumper engine sides. They cranked the heavy long pump handles until water gushed in a steady stream from the fire hose. Well, I guess they did have a hose, but it took a lot of effort. They needed to get the water to the hose in order to pump. So I think I was learning something new as we read along. I was trying to use the different clues to piece together how this story works. Oh man, look at all the stuff she's doing. Hour after hour, Molly sprayed burning timber. Angry flames hissed and spit each time she water hit them. Molly pulled down chunks of burning roof with a hooked iron rod. Flaming shingles melted the snow the moment they hit the ground, and choking smoke crept into Molly's nose. Cinders clung to her woolen shawl. A wall of heat warmed her cheeks. "My fire lads won't let this fire win, and neither will I," she thought. The fire raged and roared with the fury of a wild bobcat until at last it was out. I'm sensing a resolution. The Van Horn family shivered in their snowy yard. A haze of smoke surrounded them. They were thankful to be alive, glad the fire had not spread throughout the neighborhood. Bone tired, Molly took her place on the drag rope to pull the pumper back to the shed. Jonas, Isaac, and the other volunteers rushed to her side, broad smiles on their soot-covered faces. "Hooray for our new company volunteer," they cheered. "Molly, by golly, you're as fine as a fire lad as any," added the captain. "In fact, you're wondrous fine." So, this is the end of our story, and it shows all the questions that people usually ask about Molly, and a note about the researcher. So let's see what they have to tell us. Looks like the author said that they were intrigued about writing the story after going to a museum and learning about her. And it has some questions because this story, it says, is the legend of her. So it's a realistic fiction story about someone who actually existed. It says, what is known about Molly Williams? Very few details were known about her life. She was living in New York in the early 1800s and was a servant of Mr. Amar. So that house she was living in at the beginning. And she was one of the earliest members of Fire Company 11. It's very interesting, the information they have. This is a great book. You can probably find it from your local library or somewhere online. You could also do some research of your own to see what sort of facts you learn about Molly, the volunteer firefighter, the first female firefighter. I enjoyed reading with you today, and I hope you have a wonderful and fantastic and beautiful day. See you next time.